Hello, I'm Sean Richards of Not a Yes Man's Economics. What I'd like to talk to you about today is the issue of Brexit and what its economic impact might be. I'm saying might on two levels here. One is, of course, we still don't know whether it will happen. Probably marginally got more likely with the announcement of a general election in the UK, but of course, people might vote differently. We could head towards leave or perhaps towards remain. But looking at the scenarios ahead, there's been a report today by the National Institute for Economic and Social Research in the UK. And it makes some interesting points, but to my mind, there are also flaws in this. You see, if we look backwards, they say since the EU leave vote, the UK economy has lost about 2.5% of economic output. But the obvious issue here is we don't know what would have happened. So the problem is that they make analysis from looking at different economies and that, but the UK is often different to them anyway. What we do know is that inflation was higher. I looked at this myself back in the day, and around about 1.25% to 1.5% of extra inflation came through due to the lower value of the pound. That will have reduced economic output, but not by 2.5%. Looking forwards, there are more issues to come in. One here is one around business investment, because looking at that, they seem to assume that it won't pick up again. However, if we look at the numbers produced by the Bank of England, somewhere between 12% or 14% lower is their estimate for what business investment's been as compared to what it might have been. Now, presumably some of that will come back. We don't know the exact amount. For example, things have changed in the car industry, haven't they? And maybe assumptions of investment there are now gone. But imagine a fair bit of it would happen. So there would be an economic boost. And this, to my mind, is one of the problems of looking forwards, that we don't know the situation. For example, they assume that inflation will be on target. That's nice and convenient. But meanwhile, in the real world, that very rarely happens. They think that real wages will continue to grow. Maybe. I'd like to think so. Again, I and they don't know that. Next, they seem to have quite a lot of faith in the power of one Bank of England rate cut. That seems to happen somewhere in 2020, 2021. So for those that don't follow it, UK bank rate will go from 0.75% to half. But if that really did any good, we wouldn't be here, would we? Because, you know, it started off the credit crunch by cutting from 4.5%, 4.75%, depending exactly where you count it from. So if 4%'s worth hasn't done it, a quarter will. You get the idea. Also, looking at their analysis, they're assuming that the UK economy will grow at about 1.4%. That's really rather like the numbers France have produced earlier, and that's not Brexiting at all. So where's the issue there? Even worse than that, what I call the ivory tower style analysis, so things from places like the Bank of England or the National Institute itself, think that the UK economy has a speed limit of 1.5% of economic growth now. So 1.4% is about as near as you can get, isn't it? So where's the loss there? So as you can see, there are a multitude of problems here. And one of the things that I think comes through with this is the actual degree of uncertainty in any economic forecast. But more than that, as I hinted at earlier, we're actually at times even uncertain about what has happened, let alone what might happen in the future. If we move to financial markets, now again, they're not always right, otherwise they wouldn't move. But the pound has looked more hopeful recently, recovered up, well, above 129 for a while, even 130, but currently just below 129. And things seem to have got calmer and more stable there, similar with gilt yields. Some issues people think about equity valuations, so it's hard to say from the FTSE 100. But I think we've moved out of the situation where people thought there'd be enormous moves. So that then comes back to the analysis, how, looking 10 years ahead, what do we really know? Let me give you an example of this. Roughly that sort of time period ago, the National Institute told us that wage growth would be 5% now. We've barely got near it. Gilt yields would be 5%. They're barely over 1%. So thank you for watching, and it is much more uncertain than they say.